Hello and welcome. My name is Vineet Malhotra and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories today. US President Donald Trump has defended his tariff policy after China hit the US with a 125% retaliatory tariff. The White House says Trump is still optimistic over a China trade deal as investors grapple with the tariff-driven market swings. US and Iranian officials are set to meet in Oman over a nuclear deal, the first direct talks between the nations in a decade. The meeting comes amid threats from President Donald Trump of military action if a deal isn't agreed upon. President Trump has urged Vladimir Putin to get moving on a ceasefire in Ukraine as the Russian president meets with the US envoy Steve Witkoff. Overnight Russian strikes have been reported in Ukraine targeting Kyiv and other major cities. Meanwhile, US and Ukrainian officials have met to discuss a minerals deal. Reuters reports that sources close to the matter indicate no major breakthroughs with an antagonistic atmosphere in the meeting. Further deadly Israeli strikes have been reported in Gaza as US President Donald Trump says progress is being made in hostage negotiations. A Hamas delegation is headed to Cairo for talks as Israel submits a softened hostage deal proposal. Well, a bomb has exploded outside of the offices of Greece's main railway company with no reported injuries. Police are investigating amidst a continued anger over the country's worst rail disaster in 2023, killing 57 people. Former South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has left his residence surrounded by supporters following his impeachment ruling. Yoon still faces a criminal trial for his short-lived martial law declaration. An LA judge has ruled that, resentencing hearing for Kyle and Eric Menendez can go ahead. The brothers are serving a life term for the 1989 murder of their parents. Through a recent Netflix documentary raised new evidence of abuse by their parents. Starting with our top story, the United States and Taiwan just held their first tariff talks. Taiwan is pushing back against a 32% duty on its exports, calling them unfair. In the meeting, Taipei offered a zero tariff plan and pledged more investments in the United States. Taiwan has stated that more talks could follow suit. Taiwan, a key semiconductor supplier, has long wanted a trade deal with the United States, despite having no formal diplomatic ties. This comes as tensions escalate between the US and China. China has hiked tariffs on American goods to a staggering 125%. In response, President Trump has jacked up duties on Chinese imports to 145%. Trump is still defending his tariffs, calling it very exciting for America and the world. China's President Xi Jinping has said that Beijing is not afraid of a long trade fight and has vowed to fight back. Ross Feingold, a political risk analyst, with us on the program. Ross, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking to NewsX World once again. Where do you think this tariff war between the United States and China is headed? For what we know and for what is common knowledge, that the American economy is pretty much dependent on China being a consumer-driven economy.
If we take President Trump at his word, he wants to negotiate with China. He's repeatedly emphasized that. Although he's critical of China's trade practices, he often also says that he doesn't blame them for taking advantage of the United States, and it was the fault of presidents before him that the United States developed such a large trade deficit with China. He also emphasizes that he gets along well with Xi Jinping. So I think President Trump does want to negotiate again, keeping in mind during his first term after he initiated higher tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018. Subsequently, China and the United States agreed in January 2020 to something called the Phase 1 trade agreement. So I think Trump does genuinely want to negotiate with China. What the final tariffs would be after that negotiation it's impossible to say. That would be a product of the negotiation. But for now, President Trump is digging in, and he wants to see when will China come asking for negotiations.
Ross, there has been more pleasantness when it comes to the Americans dealing with Taiwan. Do you think that is probably going to irk the China a little more? Because formally Taiwan is not a country. It is something which, of course, the Chinese will take offense to.
I think one of the reasons why the United States Trade Representative prioritized the call with Taiwan's trade negotiators on Friday in United States time after he spoke with Israel on the same day is they wanted to annoy China. I think Taiwan's friends in Congress and in the administration, like Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, I think they said, let's prioritize negotiating a deal with Taiwan. We know it's going to annoy China. I mean, of course, Taiwan and United States have an important trade relationship, most notably for semiconductors and other high-tech equipment. So there's a lot of good reason to prioritize negotiating a deal with Taiwan. But again, I think part of that priority is political and to annoy China.
Ross, there's also been a rollback of these tariffs, or we can call it a pause for 90 days. And, a lot of experts are of the opinion that this was not really profoundly thought through. Does that put, the seriousness with which the Americans are taken into some sort of a peril?
I don't think so, because a pause just gives an opportunity. It's a window to have negotiations with the Trump administration. But I do think they're very serious about this, and the likelihood that 90 days later a lot of these reciprocal tariffs will go into effect, I think it's still high. But at a minimum, these trading partners of the United States, they have to assume that they're facing the risk of higher tariffs in 90 days. I mean, in the meantime, they're all facing a 10% tariff, what the administration's calling the baseline tariff. So it would be very risky for these other countries to not treat it as a serious possibility and fail to communicate to the Trump administration that they want to negotiate. I don't think any of those countries should take that chance. That would just be poor policy making on their part. So they have to take the threat seriously and negotiate with the Trump administration accordingly.
Ross, always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Moving on, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff met the Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg as Donald Trump urged the Russian president to get moving on a ceasefire in Ukraine. The Kremlin said that the meeting lasted over 4 hours and focused on finding solutions for Ukraine. This was Witkoff's third meeting with Putin this year, and the special envoy from Russia, Kirill Dmitriev, called the meeting productive. After the meeting, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the meeting emphasized on the Ukrainian settlement, and however, the talks come at a time when US-Russia talks aimed at agreeing on a ceasefire ahead of a possible peace deal to end the war in Ukraine appear to have stalled due to disagreements over the terms for a complete halt in hostilities. In recent days, Ukrainian officials have sent Washington a list of targets they believe Russia has struck in violation of the energy infrastructure ceasefire agreed upon by the two countries last month. Trump has further expressed frustration with Putin over the state of talks with respect to the ceasefire. The US president also wrote on social media, Russia has to get moving. Too many people are dying, thousands a week, in a terrible and senseless war. Earlier, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also said that Putin and Witkoff might discuss the possibility of the Russian leader meeting Trump face to face. All right, Mr. Gilbert Doktorov, Russian affairs expert, is joining us on the program. Sir, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, when the conversations actually imply that they were productive, what do you make out of it? Does this mean that this 4-hour conversation between Mr. Witkoff and Vladimir Putin is going to be, a step in the direction of peace, or do you think that probably, unless you get Ukraine to be on the same page, it's not possible?
It's very difficult to make sense out of these talks that are going on between the Trump administration and Mr. Putin and his team. The first thing I'll say is that from the Russian perspective, the visit by Witkoff was not expected. he was added to Mr. Putin's otherwise very full agenda in St. Petersburg because he was there for a conference with his senior naval officers, finance minister, and primary manager of Russia's commercial and military shipbuilding, and they were talking about plans for adding to the Russian fleet in the coming years. That took most of his day. Mr. Vitkov probably added St. Petersburg to his travel plans because he is in Oman today, and he's in Oman largely because it was set up for him by the Russians. So it was appropriate that he would look for a meeting with Mr. Putin before he goes into the meeting with the Iranian foreign minister today. Otherwise, I see in the meeting and the visit by Vitkov yesterday very promising signs, but I have to say we're reading tea leaves. Why do I mean by tea leaves? First fact, he didn't come by himself this time. He came with his wife. That added a personal note, which suggests a growing warmth in the relationship and gives us reason for optimism that whatever Mr. Trump is saying publicly, there is something serious going on, hinting at a Russian-American agreement on how the war will end. Not the ceasefire. The ceasefire is the least of it. The Russians are only interested in the end game. How will this war end? Does America agree to Russia's acquiring permanently and legally the territories of the Donbass, the 4 oblasts that it has recaptured largely? Is America keen on establishing fully normal relations with Russia and lifting sanctions? These are the questions that move the Russians, and I have reason to believe, not just because he took his wife and they did a little bit of high-level sightseeing. They went to see the most important synagogue in St. Petersburg and most important synagogue in the Tsarist Empire when it was built, and they visited the most important Russian Orthodox church in St. Petersburg, the St. Isaac's Cathedral. He spent 3 hours in conversations with Dmitriev at the Grand Hotel Europe. That is not a normal venue for high-level talks. And it persuades me that this was a last-minute decision to come and visit Petersburg. The Russians did not have much time because Vitkov would be on a very tight schedule ahead of his flight to Oman. Right. Therefore, the meetings that they had were all in downtown Petersburg in unusual venues. The meeting that was 4.5 hours with Vladimir Putin was in what's called the Presidential Library, a building about which none of us has heard much. It was opened in 2009 and dedicated to Boris Yeltsin, who had died a couple of years earlier, but you never see it mentioned in any government meetings. So it was chosen precisely to keep Mr. Vitkov's stay in Petersburg tightly controlled within a few downtown city blocks of Petersburg. All of this suggests to me that the visit to discuss the situation in Iran was very important to Trump and Vitkov. They take the Russian efforts very seriously, and that is an example of why Mr. Trump is keen on reestablishing normal relations with Russia, because there are things which the countries can cooperate on.
Right. So, one last question before we let you go. Do you think that America has gone out on a limb and Donald Trump is also staking his reputation when it comes to, in fact, striking a deal which Donald Trump is good at between Ukraine and Russia that eventually will, bring peace in this part of the world? But so far, there hasn't been a credible overture, if we can call it that, from President Putin towards peace.
Well, he has stated specifically the conditions under which Russia would implement in full partial ceasefires. And they have been stymied by opposition from the European Union. To have this free navigation in the Black Sea, one of the conditions is the lifting of bank sanctions on the bank that handles all Russian agricultural exports. The EU refuses to do that. So there are obstacles that are created to the conclusion of even a partial ceasefire, which Russia has nothing to do with. It's the EU's attempt to sabotage the whole business. Nonetheless, I think it's a big mistake to focus all attention on a partial ceasefire, full ceasefire. That's not it. The question is, where does this war end? Europe doesn't want it to end, and we are all aware of that. So the question for the Russians is, what is Mr. Trump going to do to Europe to get them to back off and let a peace be made? That is the real question, not Mr. Putin's willingness, non-willingness to end the war. That's a phony question that is put up by England and by France, who want desperately for this war to continue.
So always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for speaking to NewsX World. Moving on. Well, Hamas says it is hopeful for real progress towards a ceasefire in Gaza as senior leaders from the group meet with Egyptian mediators in Cairo. The talks are taking place amid continued violence, with the Israeli military intercepting 3 projectiles from Gaza and launching airstrikes and artillery fire across several areas. These discussions come just days after former U.S. President Donald Trump suggested a deal to release hostages held in Gaza was close to being finalized. Israel has slightly eased its demands in a proposed hostage deal, with Hamas now seeking fewer than the original 11 hostages. And under the new Egypt-brokered plan, 8 living hostages would be released during the first 2 weeks of a 45-day ceasefire. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Erdogan has accused Israel of attempting to divide Syria, claiming it is trying to dynamite the revolution that ousted Bashar Assad. In the southern Gaza Strip, the Israeli military says it has taken full control of the Morak corridor, effectively cutting off the city of Rafah from Khan Yunis. Rafah is now encircled, with the 36th Division securing the Morak corridor and the Gaza Division operating along the Philadelphia corridor near the Egypt-Gaza border. The head of the International Committee of the Red Cross has described the situation in Gaza as hell on earth as Israeli military operations continue. The UN Human Rights Office has expressed concern that Israel may be planning to permanently displace civilians in Gaza to create an expanded buffer zone. More than 1,500 people have been killed since Israel resumed its offensive on the 18th of March, with the head of the UN's relief agency describing Gaza as a post-apocalyptic killing zone. And finally, the UN's Ravina Shamdasani said that 36 Israeli strikes on Gaza killed only women and children. Mr. Ali M. Abushbak, independent Palestinian researcher, is joining us on the show. Ali, thank you so much for being here. Well, first of all, what do you make of this new ceasefire deal? There are fewer hostages that Israel is demanding be released at this point in time. Is that going to be the formula that's finally going to stop this madness and this killing and this war?
Thank you for having me. The things is situation on the ground, particularly in Gaza, it's beyond the imagination. The atmosphere, the positive atmosphere about reaching out for new agreement or a new agreement between Hamas and Israel or a new deal. I guess people are losing in Gaza, are losing the hope, and since Israel resumed the war in 18th of March, up to now we heard a lot of news about uncirculated or roto news about positive news about there is reaching for deal, especially that the American would go the envoy for Middle East, releasing a lot of statement that they are reaching for deal between Hamas and Israel. Today we hear, and also the Egypt proposal for a human truce before the Eid, before 2 weeks also. But unfortunately, Hamas doesn't dealing serious with this proposal. And today also there is a new proposal that proposed by Egypt that releasing 10 hostages, and also there is a new deleting from Hamas. They are reaching Cairo for complete the negotiation and to complete the deal. the news reported that despite this proposal or this deal, uh, it's a positive, but there is Israel has a different, I mean, has a different perspective about it, as well as Hamas doesn't give a new uh, any reaction with this proposal or their response. On the ground, Palestinians in Gaza, they are suffering from the starvation and the bloodshed is still ongoing, the intense Israeli airstrike daily in Gaza. So Hamas has a no card to bid in or to believe in. So I guess Hamas obligated now and find themselves to obligate to accept any proposal that I mean they will offer from any uh, actor. So the thing is, situation is a bit unclear. Either Hamas going to accept it, especially Hamas today releasing a new statement that the only person who's delaying the process of deal between Hamas and releasing the captive is that Benjamin Netanyahu, and we are coming back again to the mutual acceleration between Hamas and Israel.
All right. Ali, appreciate you joining us and filling us in on these important and intricate details from on the ground. Well, that's all we have for now. We'll keep bringing you news and updates from around the world. Be right back.